Hello everyone! Welcome back to another Mari YouTube Live Snails from Space with Meshmen. I'm Charlie, I'm the product manager of Mari, and as always I have the absolute joy of being able to speak to the people who matter the most, you guys, the artists. Today I'm joined by someone who is both equally an amazing Mari advocate, but also affectionately a huge pain in the butt and has been for the past 8 years that I've known him, Peter Aversten.
Yeah, and I was buggering other people for another. I've been using Mori 15 years now, so yeah, I was paying for other people before you.
And you'll be paying after me, I'm sure.
I hope so. I hope so. Yeah.
So today we'll be watching a session that Peter has pre-recorded for quality purposes. But Peter and I will be with you in the chat, watching alongside you, and we'll also be here afterwards for a live Q&A. So do sit back, relax, and let's all learn from Peter. Enjoy.
Okay, so let's take a look here at Snails from Space and what's this all about. So back in the day when I was a kid, I enjoyed painting model kits and dioramas. So I used a combination of traditional paintbrushes and airbrush techniques. And I also then ventured into creating illustrations using airbrush. So this is kind of where my interest for painting began. Around the same time, I also wanted to venture into animation. So I was trying to create stop motion animation, but the barrier to entry was too steep, and that is until the computer arrived. From an early age, I started to adopt computer graphics. My first paint program was actually in Commodore 64 and Koala Paint. At this time, animation was too far away, but I started to enjoy working in the computer as an alternative to traditional media. And during college, I took this course in graphic design and pre-press. So at this stage, it was on the tail end of using darkroom techniques and also the infancy of the computer-generated design. So my first exposure to this was using Photoshop 2, and this one was when Photoshop just got color. Imagine that. No color before 2. It's a bit like Mari didn't have layers before 2 either. So during my 6 or 7 years in the print industry, I started to write for this magazine called Mac Art Design with my colleague Fredrik Fogelquist. We wrote as the duo The Meshmen. So this is where Meshmen Studio comes from. This was the early 90s, mid 90s. My first 3D program was Strata Studio, and that was essentially because of the game Myst. I saw them being used in Myst, and I thought, oh, this is a cool program, so I picked it up. We later also picked up Bryce and other programs. So we made essentially like a early blog. So we posted an image a day. So we did this during lunch breaks. For example, when NASA first landed on Mars I think it was back in 97, we made Bryce images from the event on our lunch break. But at the back of my mind, I always wanted to realize this animation dream and working in visual effects. And this is George Lucas' fault. As a huge Star Wars fan, I always wanted to work within the movie industry. So this is where I found this course. In Stockholm, there was a 2-year course focusing on using computer-aided design and graphics. So I started to learn Maya, doing animations and all of that. So this is where I came into the movie industry. So back in Sweden then, after graduating here, I started to work for various companies in and around Stockholm. So one of the companies was Fido, and this is where my first contact with Mari and the Foundry actually materialized. So at the tail end of Avatar, Foundry picked up Mari as a product, as an official product from Weta. So we were doing a documentary with David Attenborough, and we needed to essentially texture a lot of dinosaurs. So we reached out to Foundry and we got hold of a early beta version of Mari 1. So it was 0.9 alpha or something when I started to use Mari. And after Foundry released Mari 1, I went down with Foundry to FMX and had a seminar how we used Maury on this David Attenborough production and how we textured some of the dinosaurs on this show. So after a couple of years in Sweden using Maury, I then moved over to the UK where I started to work for various VFX companies. And around this time, I also started my YouTube channel, Meshmen Studio, where I started to teach some of the techniques I picked up during my years using Maury. And this is now where Snails from Space series comes into play. So Snails from Space is my version of a digital model kit. So you remember I used to like painting model kits as a kid, and I now wanted to create my own virtual model kit. So what I did was to take my garden snail here that I have essentially been out in my garden for a long time. It's been exposed to the weather, the winter and the rain and everything. And now I took this one into my studio, rigged out my camera and 2 lights. And then I started to take a bunch of photos and I rotated on this swivel plate here. Next up, I brought this into Metashape where I scanned this one. And then I brought this into Maya where I did a remodeling and reused it. So now it's available here on my Gumroad to download as a project so we can follow along. So there's different variants of this base asset. So we have, for example, here an asset with 3 UDIMs, and that's the non-commercial one, 6 UDIMs, 10 UDIMs, and 37 UDIMs and rocket engines. We also have a bunch of supporting materials, Rust, for example, one of the episodes I made Rust. So the asset also comes with the capture textures, so you can reference. And this is essentially what I did here when I constructed this asset. So I based all of these masks here from the captured textures coming from the scan session. The first thing I do when I tackle any project in texturing, I essentially lay a groundwork. So I make a pipeline. So essentially here, if I would dissect this asset here, I would generate regions. So the basic regions first. For example, this texture here have a different color, the turquoise color compared to the red, compared to this greenish, compared to orange and this yellow. Well, essentially what I did was to create very basic masks just to define the major regions in the beginning. After I have define these regions, I export these out and do a test render. I also set up additional very basic materials to define roughness and these things first. So I can use this later on when I construct my material workflow. Okay, so now I want to focus here on my different masks. So I deliberately made these masks as individual channels because I have quite complex setup here when it comes to keying out things here. For example, if I take this one here, this is the textures coming from the scan, and we can see here we have a lot of dirt and stuff. So I wanted to key different values and construct a mask. So this one here is the green mask, for example. I'm using here different methods to key here. So first off here, I add a color to scalar. So this is just to take this color projection and make it into a scalar value. A scalar value is then used as a mask in my case. So I'm keying here color to mask. So I'm essentially picking a color value from, we have this error here. So if I increase this one, it's gonna key more of this color here. I'm going here through and making this in different groups. So I'm essentially combining my groups here into a full mask. And as you can see here, it also picks up values here into the turquoise because those colors are very close to each other. So at this moment, I'm only concentrating of making this value work for me here. I'm not paying any attention of this. So because I'm then essentially here adding black. So I'm only interesting of this one, and then I essentially duplicate this and flatten it, and I use this as a region mask in my material setup. So looking here at the individual mask, we have, for example, here mask green, mask orange, mask turquoise, and red and yellow. So I did this on these separate material regions as a base for my material workflows. As you can see here, we have I'm just gonna essentially disable all of these groups here and take a look from the base we can see here. So the base here is my reference. This is the textures coming from the scan session. So now I'm recreating these individually here. For example, I'm adding first a rust material. So in this case here, if I go and turn this one on, I have my a material that I also made a separate tutorial about how to make this rust and metal. In the bottom here, I have a group that is two different materials. So I have a steel material. So I took this steel material essentially from the Mari shelf materials. I think I reused this one, but I extended upon it. Then I made a procedural rust material. I used a rust picture as a base to create my own rust material. The base here is essentially defining the metal and the rust part, because on top of this I'm gonna have the paint, and I'm gonna use this mask to apply the paint for the different regions. Next up here we can enable this one and get the turquoise, and there we see there's my turquoise. And this material group here has a base material, and we also have some grades that I made here. For example here, if I disable this mask here, if I take this one and shift click on this one, we can open the mask here. And if I would insert, for example, a white constant here, I'm gonna enable this mask everywhere. So we can see essentially the material, how it looks without this mask. So this mask is coming from essentially my keyed mask here. So this one, the mask turquoise. So I save this one out and copy it into this material region that I created. So I'm tackling this like a region at a time, where I concentrate on first having a base material that kind of works for all of them. And then I am individually constructing each of these materials. Could have one material and then also have regions to dictate just the color change. But if you, for example, want to control speckle or roughness and other properties within the material, it can be better to have essentially separate materials depending on how you want to tackle this. The same coming here, I have a base material and a region for the red material. And as you can see here, essentially at this stage, all my material is kind of clean. I'm not adding any additional dirt. That's something that I do on top of everything. So I'm thinking about the general integration, where we have the mask that is just dictating where the material is, and then I am looking at extracting the dirt on top, so I can have this as a wash on top of all of my materials. I'm kind of thinking in coatings here. In layer order, we would have the metal and the rust in the bottom. Then we have paint, and on top of paint we would have integration such as dirt or other effects. And here we can see I'm adding my green material. It's the same principle. I essentially took my turquoise material that is building essentially from the shelf. So I hijacked this one, this green metal, and I hijacked that one, but I reconfigured it so it has the potential to have 2D and 3D projections. And that's something I also did in one of my episodes in this tutorial series. And I also made that material available as a smart material. So let's say that we want to add or remove from this yellow here. What we can do is to just take this material region here. So this is essentially a group, and we have a material and some manual operations on top of this to grade this one. We also have this region mask here derived from this channel mask that we looked at earlier. So we can go into this one. If I click on this one, it opens up here, and here essentially we have the mask. I can paint directly in this mask, or we can add a layer here. So I'm just gonna add a layer to my mask and start to paint here. Let's say that we wanna further refine this one. I'm just gonna take another brush. So if I would paint with white now, it will add. And if I would paint with black, it will subtract. So I can now go in here and do additional operations on top of my keyed mask that we had there. So this channel mask that I created is essentially just to get me with complexity, because I have to key different regions and combine them. I choose to do this in separate channels just to keep complexity low, because as you can see here, if I go into my layers, even if I do this, there's quite a lot of layers, and using using the layer stack, this can become quite heavy. So it kind of looks non-trivial here, but if I would go into the node graph, you would see the sheer amount of actual layers and nodes that is generated when we do this. So you can see here, I can now start to go in here and adjust. If I want to do some chips here, I can do that. Can also fade out here the regions a bit. On top of all of this, I have a sand material. So let's see here, if I enable this one here, we can see here what happens. So this is where I started to look at generating a dirt mask. You can see here, you can kind of see the dirt coming on here. If I go in here and hide this mask, I fully covered the asset with dirt. And then I'm using this mask here to add dirt on top of all of this. And in the same fashion that I generated this region mask, I also have a separate mask here with my dirt here. So let's take a look at this one, the dirt mask, and see how this one looks. I essentially did the same as in my region mask, but instead of targeting primary colors for the regions, I then started to key out the actual dirt integration. So this one was quite complex to be able to key out all of these washes here. So if I take this layer and below here, and take a look here at my base, I'm essentially keying the color here from the dirt. So I'm closely paying attention to, like, this one looks like it's been streaked. So I was keying out the sand color here, but I have to do this in portions because we have this underlying color that is essentially the regions. So I need to pay attention to exactly what color the dirt has and do this incrementally. So I'm essentially blending these together. So I'm using a screen operation here. If I enable this one, you can see here now I added some more dirt here on this operation. I'm adding additional dirt here. If I look at this one, tweak this one in here, we can see here this is where I add the majority of this one. Next one, I'm continue to working on the integration there, to keying out some values of the dirt there. And then I'm concentrating to pick up the values from around the dome there. And what I can do later on, if I want to then further work on the mask, I can do it here as a separate layer. I can essentially take my put my this one on top here using some paint methods here. I can go in here, for example, and pick some Brad's new brushes. We can take some old Shippy, for example, with low opacity, and further start to introduce break up or add or remove here. So that's essentially what I did in the dirt mask when I have all of this in context. I took all of this, as you can see here, there's a lot of keying here. I essentially flattened all of this as a separate mask on top. And this one I copied into my layer stack where I have all my material work. Because having all of this live would be very expensive, but if I just have one paint node, I can optimize this. So this is a kind of a workaround using the layer stack. You need to think about complexity. In the node graph that we're going to cover in the next episode, where we're going to see where we can translate this one into the node graph, you have additional workflows that can help you doing very demanding operations, but still have the speed, and that's the bake point nodes. So this is something that it's a bit harder to maintain operational speed in the layer stack, something that you can very much do in the node graph, and you can have very complex operations in the node graph and still have reasonable speed on assets that has even hundreds of UDIMs. So let's take a look here at my layer stack here and go back to my dirt here. So looking here at my sand material mask, when I enable this one, we can see here when I enable or disable it, you can see here what that one does to the overall impression there. So here, taking a look at this one, we can see here I did additional touch-ups. So the base layer here, if I take a layer and below, this is the mask that we looked at in my channel. But then I have an add where I essentially add additional dirt. I have a remove one, but I don't think I actually use this one. But the remove one could be, for example, if you want to have something live, you could start to paint instead of painting white, you can start to paint black to remove If I would do this, for example, to paint in black, I can still then change my mind if I want to tweak this one or maybe fade it slightly. I have the option to do that in this case here. In my case, I just added dirt because I analyzing my model and see where my keying missed. I started to paint in those areas, or I could use procedural techniques on top of this as well. So that's very much possible as well. But this is kind of the workflow I used for this one. Define regions, sort out the test, start to think about the base materials, generate very simple base materials where you define the roughness and the bump and all of that. Then concentrate on the integration and think about how this would be layered in the real world. For example, like you have rust, you have paint, you have dirt, all of these you have to think about in layers and how, in what order they add. And then on top of that, integration. In the next one, we're gonna talk about how you would plan for this type of workflow, but in the node graph. Take a look here. I have this shader here and I have my materials all set up since earlier. And you can see here, it's kind of slow to look at the preview. So looking at this channel here, I have almost instant feedback still here. Using the shaders and looking at the materials using layers can be quite taxing on your system. But now let's take a look here why node graph is better than layers. So this is what happens when you build anything using layers. So if I'm looking here at my layers, all of this here is, I think, is these nodes here. When Mari auto builds this, it kind of just lays it out as I go here. But when I build something using a node graph, we have more precision in how we can optimize because we can offload portions. So essentially when you use the layer stack, everything is evaluated unless you cache it. So essentially when you use caching, if I will cache all my nodes here, they get frozen and it's really hard to interact. So that's why it's better to build your node graph from scratch. So I'm just gonna lay out these nodes here just to see here what's actually these nodes here is this here. So I'm now gonna jump over to a fresh Mari session and we can essentially replicate what we have done here, but in the node graph quite quickly. I have here made a new asset and I have imported this 3-UDIM asset, but I also have here the Snail upres asset that is available also download for free here on my Gumroad. So for example here, I wanna transfer these masks here into my 10-UDIM because I'm not gonna redo that one in this demo here. So what we can do here is to take my channel. I made a separate tutorial about how to do this more in depth, but I'm just gonna do it here on one of these here. So I'm gonna go transfer. I'm gonna from my object Snail 3-UDIM, I'm gonna take my into 10-UDIM asset here. I'm just gonna take this channel here and I'm just gonna take a look here. I have radial, inverse, distance weighted and world units. So I'm just gonna hit OK here and transfer this texture from my 3-UDIM asset into my 10-UDIM asset and use this one as basis for my material regions in a similar way that I did for the layer stack. Looking here in my UV view, I now have this mask transferred over to my 10-UDIM. So essentially here what I've done is I have this third object here where I've essentially gone through and transfer all of the important mask here coming from previous sessions. So I can essentially start to plug my material workflow in here pretty quick into my uprest asset here. So here's some of the major masks that I'm gonna reuse here in my material workflow here going forward. Okay, I'm back in my layer graph scene. I'm just gonna hijack a few of these materials here just for convenience sake. So I want to have this steel and my rust material. Looking here at the node graph, when we build it, auto build it, it's quite chaotic. And this is something that is much easier to maintain when we build it ourselves. Essentially here, looking here, very basically here, if I go into my layer stack, we can see here these names here, steel, rust. This is the bottom of the layer stack and this is the top of the layer stack. So I just want to export these two materials and then I also want to export some of these materials for my painted materials and some of these grade nodes here as well, because I've essentially graded some of these materials to become the final color of the asset. So I'm gonna do that now and then bring these nodes into my other scene and start to hook this up. So what we can do is to select these nodes here that I wanna export out and reuse, and I'm gonna right click here and say File, Package Nodes. And this is something I'm just gonna save here to my location. And I'm also gonna export these HSV nodes here. So I'm just gonna take this base material and this HSV node and export this one out as well. Let's import these things that I exported from my lay stack. So I have made here a shelf with my snail stuff. So I'm just gonna take one of these node packages here. So I essentially have here material and then HSV node that I'm gonna use. A material in Mari is a node graph within a group. So if I look at this one here and just take a look at what we get, we have exposed parameters here. For example, we can say repeat, we can start to grade, saturation, etc. So this is essentially something you can build yourself. So I have extended upon one of the materials that is shipped here in the shelf. So I extended this one, the metal green here, and just added some additional stuff that I'm using here. So looking inside this material, we can see here, it's very basic here. We have tileable nodes that is driven by links. They are linked together essentially. And then we have some operations on top like HSV and other things that's been exposed here. So what I'm gonna do is recreate the regions that I did before. So for example here, this is the turquoise part. Let's drag another one in so we can see here. Let's take the red, for example, and I just have my red material set up, and this red material essentially had two different materials, one that is 2D and one that is 3D. I'm doing that to take away, for example, edges where I have UV seams. In the bottom here now, I'm just gonna now do a quick blend between these two. So let's take this one and I'm just gonna hit the M and create a multi-shell merge. So essentially blending all of these nodes at the same time into a blend node. And then blend node is essentially a layer. So I'm just gonna add this one on top. And now we're essentially gonna have two materials on top of each other like so. And now I want to grade this one so it actually becomes red. So in the lay stack example, I had some operations on top of my material that was actually grading the diffuse color. So I can do the same here if I want to. I'm just gonna insert another merge node here onto my material and take my cloud. So I'm gonna borrow the diffuse stream coming from my material. So the base color. So this one is essentially a cloud with a color on top. I'm gonna merge this one. So I'm gonna have a merge node as well. I'm gonna merge this one on top here. So I'm essentially doing this instead. Now I'm gonna take my blending mode to become component color. Maybe I want to further do an HSV operation because I had some HSV, I graded it additionally. So I can do the same here, but it's easier to maintain it now in the node graph than when it's auto-built like it did in the lay stack. So I'm just gonna pipe this one back to the base color like so. So now we have essentially done an override from the material. I've done some manual overrides for just the diffuse stream, and I can now essentially package this using a backdrop. So this one becomes like my red material. And then I need to decide where will this red material be applied. So I could essentially have individual HSV nodes for the entire material, like if I would do it here. But the problem with that is I'm gonna get the same kind of repeat. So I want to randomize the material or the projections for the different regions. So that's why I'm choosing to use a few materials with different projections and orientations, so we don't get this evident pattern that we can see here. If I zoom out, we can kind of start to see the same repeating pattern. So that's why I'm applying it like this. So now I essentially want to create a mask here. So I'm just gonna insert paint node and apply this one into my mask. And I'm gonna look here through this multi-channel merge now. And now we can see I don't have any red material, but we want to apply it onto this region here. And I'm just going to drag this one into this region. So we see here now we have essentially applied the red material here. What I've done here is I've done similar. So I had turquoise, red, I had a slightly greenish, and then this one was orange, and this one was yellow. So now I'm gonna jump over to another object where I have this set up and working, so we can dissect how this is actually set up when I replicated the same thing that I have in the lay stack, but in a controlled fashion. So I'm just gonna take another object here. So what I've done here is to, if we look at this, so I kind of used the mask that I converted earlier. So I have those imported here. Also have broadcast nodes here for my different masks. So a broadcaster is essentially a way to declare a variable that I then can pick up whatever I want to. So I can just say teleport receiver. This case here is just gonna take the last defined one. But I can go in here and this drop down here, I can get a list here of already the defined mask, so I can switch here depending on. So I'm setting up my mask over here, and then if I dissect this one, I'm applying here this is kind of the step I did, but this is more refined. So in this stage here, I have my initial assignments. So this is just the zoning. You can see here, now I apply the red. The next step here, this is the green material. And I also here did some additional patching for UV seams in the bottom. I have a cloud and an HSV operation. And that one is fed back into like a complete material. I have here the next zone. And my strategy for this is just to define the materials and the zoning for them. The breakup is something I apply later on. So you can see here, the next one here is the orange one. And we can also kind of mimic the backdrops so it's clear what material is what here. And then lastly, we have the yellow. And this node here is a multi-channel bake point. So this is the good part about material workflow. You can see here, I have quite a lot of materials and nodes here contributing. And eventually it will start to become slow. But I'm treating this as the paint block. So this is the painted coating on top. So I'm freezing all of these blends and operations into a multi-channel bake point. So looking at this one, then I'm using here in my base here, essentially I have my metal and rust material. So if I would go in here and say here, teleport receiver, and I want to pick up the mask metal here. So we can see here. So you see here, I have this mask where I dictated that this is where I want metallic properties. I'm just going to slide this one into the mask stack there. And now take a look. And now I should have bare metal where those ones are, like so. If I want to paint something on top, I could just go in here and say paint. I want to have my transparent and I'm going to have this over. I can additionally do additional work here. For example, let's say that we want to have some scuff here. And there we go. Now I'm blending this material properties here or this painted on top of my metal and rust. And then I'm using this mask that I constructed. So I essentially have all of my region masks that I used from the layer stack, but I'm essentially adding those together so it becomes a single mask looking like this. This is what I use to apply my paint on top of my metal now. It's a single mask, and I also have a bake point here just to optimize this one even further. And the result is then looking through this material blend here, this is what I get, where I now have metal in the bottom and the paint on top. And we can see here, if I would like to have more or less of this underlying metal here or rust, I can go into my mask and paint black or white there. Now I have here a separate dirt material. Looking here, what we get here is my dirt. I can go in here and do some overrides. I'm gonna take this paint here. So I need to define a receiver. I haven't done that. So teleport, broadcast, dust, dirt is the variable that we're gonna search for. So now I'm picking this one up and I'm gonna add this one on top of my diffuse here using emerge. And there we go. We can tweak it here slightly. like so. And now looking here through my shader, we can see here, this is what I get. And now we will have the dirt on top here once it's, yeah, there we can see. So we can see here, we kind of have dirt. It's not as evident because I've tweaked it here. So I have these two masks here, this mask and this mask that is coming also from my layer stack that I just transferred over. And then I have a fade here. So essentially my fade here is dictating how much of this we're gonna see here. So if I start to work here with my constant here, I'm multiplying this one on top here. So the more I'm essentially adding this value here, the more I will see from it. So if I go back to my shader, we can see how this will work when we actually start to integrate this. You can see here, if I do this, if I take it towards 1, we're gonna get more from this mask, and towards 0 of this dirt here. So I'm just adding now like a dust layer on top here, like so. And I could obviously go in here and additionally paint on top if I want to have more or less of this dust. So this is kind of how I approach it using the node graph. Instead of having everything one after the other, I like to compartmentalize. So I'm essentially here starting with my rust and metal in the bottom and constructing a paint layer on top, and then I bake it down once I'm happy with the assignments, just to get faster turnaround. And also you can bring more complexity. For example, if I would need to have additional materials, it's easy for me just to add that and then rebake this bake point and everything will be up to date. The same thing here goes to my mask where I combined. If I need to do additional overrides, I can do it here after the bake point or before the bake point, depending on if I want this live or optimized. Additionally, for example, if you would need to have like a wetness layer, you could start to insert another multi-channel bake point here after here, and additionally construct, additional materials on top. Or maybe you need to have like an oil pass or something that has a slightly different surface property. You could do that as well. So it's more free to design the workflow than if you let the layer stack build your material workflow. And it's also more human readable what's going on here compared to when you just use the layer stack. So in the next one, we're just gonna take a quick look at the asset with the rocket engines. I just want to take a look here now what's coming next in these tutorials here. So for example here, you can already download this asset here now with this extended UV set. So I'm just going to take a look here what we have. So we have 38, I believe, UDIMs, and also we have additional G here with the rocket engines. What I did here was to actually add in the bottom here to have two different metals here. So we have this one that is kind of a shiny metal, and we have this one that is kind of a tarnished metal. So I created here a mask to essentially drive where this tarnished metal is applied. So in the bottom here, I'm using a geochannel with an occlusion. So the occlusion and curvature that is used here is baked here through the bakery. So I baked out ambient occlusion and curvature, and I'm using this here. I'm inverting this one and crunching it. I'm applying a tallable procedure here to drive it. And then I'm using this from the shelf here. Now we have this smart mask. So I'm using one of the smart masks here called rough metal that I'm kind of adding on top here of everything. And this in turn is the base for my metallic properties here for this one. So we remove this one, we see the breakup is diminished like so. That's the base. And then I worked a bit on the integration of the rust. So we have this rust material on top that's completely covering, and I then integrated this further, also using a mask here, rusty edges, and the result of this mask looks like this. So essentially I'm just slightly applying some kind of rust effect here. This one is then added like this, so we have the paint on top. I also further tweaked here the dirt masks. I also took one of the shelf masks here, the grime, and just added that here. So looking through the shader here, we get this result here. So let me see here, if I zoom in here, we can see that this is what I added. So all of this is going to be covered in the upcoming episodes. That's going to culminate in also acquiring HDRs and a backplate that will then gonna insert this asset into in the end. There's gonna be a lot of new tutorials coming out here in the near future, focusing on this one with the rocket engines coming next here on my YouTube channel.
Wow. Okay, I just got a masterclass in node graph texturing and material workflows. Well, we all did, but I was learning as well.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Peter, for that. Again, we are going to be here for a little while longer, so if you do have any questions, do feel free to drop them in the chat. Doesn't matter how small or noobish you think they might be. I promise someone has always asked a stupider question, and they've always still been very, very important for us to answer. So in the meantime, I have a couple of questions because, like I said, I haven't been using Mari as long as Peter, for quite a while. I think, well, maybe like 12 years now I've been using Mari. 8 of those have Foundry, and I used Mari for 2 years at Foundry before I was like, I guess I'll give that node graph a try. So Peter, as somebody who has used Mari since day one, pretty much, how
before
did
day
you
one.
find that? Yeah, before official day one for sure.
Yeah.
How did you find the transition to node graph? Because you're very node graph based now, aren't you?
Yeah, so essentially, then when I was at FMX, I talked to Jack Risley, that was head of Mari back then, and he asked me after the initial release, what do you want to see in Mari? And I said, even back then when Mari didn't even have layers, I said, I want to have nodes. And it took me a while before I could use nodes. So yeah, I'm always advocating for texturing with nodes because it's more logical to me, and I can do stuff that is virtually impossible to do in the layer stack because it becomes too complicated if you want to reuse stuff. So I like the nodes because the power that you can reuse things in a non-linear way, and that's essentially where my love for the node graph came. And I haven't looked back.
It's very logical. It's
Yeah.
a very logical approach.
Yeah. It's definitely.
It's a scary thing for those of us who have a traditional art background. It can seem quite scary.
Yeah, but it takes you 5 minutes until you get it. Like, this is like, this is how you do it, and that essentially like adding a layer, just one thing over the other with the mask. It's once you get that, it's not too complicated, really.
Yeah, I highly recommend anyone who has been putting off trying out the node graph or is just not sure, or you've been using Mari for a million years and you've been using layers that entire time. Just spend half a day in the node graph. Just have a little play around it. By the end of that week, I promise you will not be wanting to use layers anymore. And
yeah, it's really hard to go back.
Use layers as well. I can't go back.
Definitely, yeah.
But I mean, the exciting thing about the Snails from Space course that you've been doing, and obviously we saw part of it today, part of your new section of the course, I guess.
Yeah, it's an ongoing
section. New chapter.
Yeah.
The exciting thing to me is that you really started from the beginning, and you started with an asset that you've very kindly made available for free, and also with a Mari version that is free. So Mari non-commercial will work with your tutorials, and that's very, very exciting. It means everyone can get it.
I kind of had that as a mindset because when I've been working at one of the many of the major studios, and sometimes it's hard to get people into the Mari realm. So I want to teach as much as I can and also expose it to as many people as can. So that's why I made a simple asset in this case that is also scalable into bigger workflows that's coming next year. So
Yeah.
the initial that I've been doing now up till now has been focusing on using. I think I haven't touched any extension pack or any techniques that you can't translate into the asset. But now, when I get into this more advanced one, I will now start to adopt more advanced workflows that will be more geared towards production, what you can see in a production asset in one of the bigger studios. So yeah, that's kind of where it's heading now.
I
It's
mean,
going to be exciting.
is there any advice you would give to anyone starting out? I know, take a look at your tutorials, obviously, because I mean, even
Yeah,
the Mari team watch your tutorials because we love them.
my number one advice is reference is king. Just download as
Yes,
much reference as you can. Try and find as much reference, because it's easy to get carried away and just think you know what you know, and actually looking at reference is really important in our industry. You can't beat good reference, essentially.
absolutely,
Other than that,
absolutely.
just learn the ropes. Just try out nodes. I can't stress how much essentially node graph is the number one advantage for Mori, I think, at the moment, and
Yep.
why you can do such really advanced. We have assets that can have hundreds. I worked on assets that had 1,000 UDIMs, um, and you can still work. It's
Mm.
it's marvelous, but you have to plan around. It's a bit like Mari is a compositor slash paint program rather than a paint program. So you have to think how you would composite things. That's my tip as well.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah,
That makes sense. I
yeah,
like that. And obviously, we do love our Nukin styled node graph, although
yeah,
it's evolved much more than that now. But shout out to our Nuke family, I guess.
yeah. Definitely.
So
Yeah.
there was a question in the chat uh, from No Plastic, who I recognize your name from the Mari Discord. So hello. I don't know what your real name is, so I'm going to keep calling you No Plastic. I hope that's okay. Um, but they say they've always been confused with the transform paint buffer versus the zoom paint buffer. Will any of those workflows degrade resolution if you zoom in too close, or do I need to leave them alone without zooming in? I want to offer that to you first, Peter.
Oh my God, I don't even know that. You tell me. Soon.
Um,
Yeah, I don't really use that much, to be honest. What I know. Yeah, you answer it, Charlie.
so transforming the paint buffer, you are transforming the paint that's already there. Zooming the paint buffer, that tool specifically keeps the resolution that you have set. So if your paint buffer is 4K, no matter how much you zoom in, that paint buffer will still be 4K. But if you imagine that you are looking here at this camera and I have 4K between my hands, if I zoom in, 4K becomes, in a way, smaller because you're looking at the pixels a bit closer. So it's good for zooming in. If you zoom in by making 4K really small, then you're going to get loads of resolution in that one area, and you will lose resolution when you zoom. It's good for zooming out, but you'll lose resolution zooming in. It's very hard to explain.
it's
It's very
it's very hard to
backwards.
explain. Yes, definitely.
You got
It's
to
very
imagine it like
technical.
doing this. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think like when I try to explain how Mari works, it's like painting on a sheet of glass. Is my analogy of
Yes.
like how Mari is actually working. Like you painting in something in midair, and then it just projects down onto the
Yes.
object,
Yeah.
kind of. Yeah. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's
That's
what
definitely how I
because you
explain it as
really
well.
don't paint on the object in that sense. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Definitely. I guess my advice would be don't mess with it until you really need to. But always be
yeah,
aware that if you're very if your buffer is very large and you are, in a sense, zoomed out, when you move away from your object, your buffer is still that size. So you might start getting a bit of rotation issues because you're actually rotating a very large space or a very small space. And there's a whole bunch of KB articles on the support portal to check out if anything has gone wrong with your Zoom paint buffer as well. So there's another question from Ignacio. I had industry experiences where the material workflow was a big no-no for some higher-ups. How would you encourage these powerful workflows when the people in charge are conservative and old school? This is a
Oh my God,
difficult
this is a very political
question.
question.
I think
love
maybe let's
material
take this as
workflow.
how would you
Material
encourage
workflow is saving my butt on a daily basis. That's
it?
what it does. I mean, I always when I start to tackle anything, even if it's like a character, I always build a library of materials that I have in my toolbox. For example, if I'm gonna make an asset with a skin, I make like 4 or 5 different skins, and then I blend between these ones. So I essentially build like a palette of materials that then I have to my disposal. So I definitely, I think material workflow is definitely something that we need to use more, and I think we also I think what is happening in Mari is starting to essentially we're gonna get more and more community-based materials. I'm doing some, and I think we will see some coming next from the community as well. So I'm not sure where Charlie just disappeared magically. Yeah. So some of my materials will be on the Mari site when it's launched, and maybe you should plug that as well, Charlie. I'm not sure if it's time to do that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what Peter said is completely true. And again, sorry for disappearing. I had 3% battery, and I didn't know I hadn't plugged it in. So yes, the Foundry community forums has a share section on the page. Historically, that has been used for geometry-based projects and people showing off their work in the 3D space like Modo. What we would love to do, and there is discussions underway with our team internally, shout out to Paul in our team who's been heading this off, about we'd like to turn that into a platform for Mari artists to be sharing materials, to be sharing gizmos or node packages, templates, HDRIs, anything and everything to help kickstart getting your project up and running. We know that content in Mari has not always been, there hasn't always been a lot of it, to be honest. And even with the introduction of the material system, I think we were quite conservative with what we delivered, and they were very much starting building blocks, as we saw Peter developing on those in the video as well. So yeah, very excited for what this might mean, and it's also a good standard for us to keep to and hold ourselves to. We should be giving you guys as much content as we possibly can, and we should be allowing you guys to share what you know with each other, because you know far better than we do. So yeah, very excited.
Yeah, and as a side note to that, when that portal is launched, I will definitely post all of my support materials for this course will be there as well, so it's easy to get to when that one is up. So that's something I plan to upload all of those support, like my smart stuff and Rust materials and also coming stuff, because everything in this Snails from Space tutorial series will be free, at least the Mari part. I'm not sure how I will do when we come to the backplates, because I'm not sure if those are appropriate, but all of the Mari materials will definitely be there when I come to that. So that's on my to-do list, and hopefully I'm not sure when the launch is, but it will be there on launch date.
No set date yet, but as soon as you guys, as soon as we know, we will tell you guys, and we'll very much announce on our Mari Discord. Elise in the chat has shared that, so please do come and join us. You're also welcome to ask further questions there after the stream. Peter and I are both there. I may go join the Mari team at the pub, but I'll also come and chat to you on Discord if you want me to. So always happy and always available for questions there and for chatting.
Yeah,
No
the
plastic.
founder Discord is really lively, so there's a lot of discussion there.
It's a great place. A great place. We have learned so much from having that kind of immediate access to you guys as the users, the artists, because historically it's not always been the case, and the community hasn't been so vocal. So other than hearing about bugs when they're logged to support, it was quite a quiet time back then. But now I think we have a really good relationship, and most of the Mari team is there. Well, a subset of the Mari team is there and willing to participate in conversations. So you can just ping us. Can't always promise that we'll answer or solve your problems, but we'll definitely be here listening and passing them on and discussing whether or not we really need to go fix that bug that Peter's been complaining about for 5 months.
Oh my God.
Probably do.
A few of those. Done my fair share of bug searching my days for using Mari.
No, and it genuinely is appreciated, like for everyone, no matter what kind of user you are, whether you're in a studio, whether you're an individual, whether you're literally picking up Mari for the first time, your feedback means the world to us, especially those of you who are starting Mari for the first time or starting a new workflow in the Node graph for the first time, because you guys are the ones who haven't yet learned the quirks of Mari and learned to ignore them. So if you tell us, then that's a valid thing that we need to improve on for Mari's ease of use. So
yeah, I mean, I learned something new the other day. I didn't know that you can do transfer of nodes like you could do for the layer stack. When was that introduced? It's totally slipped under my radar. Well, when was that introduced?
7.0. 7.0 that was introduced.
Okay. Oh, you see.
It's very cool. And we have, well, obviously I can't talk about what's coming up, but there's some good stuff coming up for that space as well. So very excited.
Yeah.
So I think we have time for one more question. No plastic again. I'm also in the stop motion industry and considering how advanced color 3D printing is. It would be interesting how Mari textured characters would translate into the real world. Ooh. So Peter, you do quite a bit of 3D printing, right?
Not so much. A bit. I don't have a color printer.
I've seen your 3D printer.
I'm in the back there. You can see Archidito somewhere. It's my next project that I'm printing out and kind of build a robot. But yeah, I don't have a color printer, so I'm not sure how that works. But I think new color printers, you can define up to a bunch of different filaments that you can target. So maybe you could, I'm not sure how that works. I can't answer that. I have no clue.
Yes. I won't name any names, but I know for a fact that there are some studios and names that people can probably guess that do mix 3D printed textured models from Mari and hand painted ones. So it's definitely doable. Do I understand that full workflow? No, but it looks really cool. So definitely want to learn more about that. But yes.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we are at the top of the hour. So thank you very much, Peter, again, for coming and spending your evening with us. I know it's hard after a long day's work. Thank you everyone for coming along and supporting this. Please do like and subscribe and keep requesting these kind of live streams because it's awesome to be able to spend time chatting with you all and, to be honest, learning a lot. So please also do continue to keep an eye on all of Peter's pages, your YouTube, Meshmen's YouTube, Meshmen's website, Gumroad. Keep an eye on the Snails in Space course and everything else that is gonna
new stuff coming on very soon. So
yes, very exciting. So thank you again, and we will catch you all very soon.
Yeah. Bye bye.